welcome. I'm honored that you guys would be here tonight. I really appreciate you coming and being a part of this launch and really the foundation of the South Carolina Study Center. Christians confess that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And this is an astonishing reality. It's a wonderful mystery. But notice what the Apostle John in his Gospel says right after he says that the Word became flesh. He says, "We saw His glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." Reflecting on these verses at the dawn of the 20th century, Herman Bavinck said that Christianity has always been both a religion of grace and a religion of truth. No mere subjective experience could have motivated the apostles and early martyrs of the church to travel far and wide and suffer and die for the name of Christ. They were convinced it was true, totally true, wholly true. Likewise, the early fathers of the church claimed that Christianity was the true religion and the true philosophy, that it satisfied the deep longings that pagan religion could not satisfy, and it enlightened the mind amidst the vain speculations of the philosophers. Now, of course, we also understand that Christian history is complicated. Christians have not always agreed on the right way to relate believing and knowing. If we were to reflect on the path through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Enlightenment up to the modern day, we would have to admit that serious and significant challenges have been brought against the claim that Christianity is true. In fact, in this room, we probably some of us would disagree on the right way to express the Christian faith, or the right apologetic method, or how to effectively engage the secular and increasingly pagan culture that we live in. But what remains throughout the ages, or we might say what makes Christianity so stubbornly persistent, and what gives it such a tenacious hold on the hearts of people across cultures and time and space, is the reality that Christianity has a unique and unrivaled ability to satisfy both the heart and the mind, both our feeling and our thinking, both our longing for meaning and our quest for truth. The Christian faith speaks a better word because it speaks to the whole person. It's a world and life vision that's too big, too vast, and too deep to have been made up by any one of us. But once you enter into it, once you try it on, you realize, no, but it was made for us. And there are forces in the culture, in the academy, and in the church that would like to tear apart faith and understanding. But we need to remember that this is not the way of Scripture or the Christian tradition. And our mission at the South Carolina Study Center is to preserve and pass on this conviction that authentic faith leads to and not away from genuine understanding. We share with the university a commitment to higher learning, but we just press on and say we can't stop until the mind finds its rest in God and in God alone. So to students and grad students who are here tonight, we want this house and this ministry to be a place for you to learn, to grow in your understanding of the Christian faith and of your calling in life. It's a place to meet, to study, to learn, and like James said, to ask hard and difficult questions that maybe weren't met with such receptivity in your home church, as well-meaning as they were. We want this to be a place where that's fine and that's actually expected. And Lord willing, we want it to be a place to cultivate wisdom. For professors who are in the room, we want this to be a place for you also to meet and to mentor and to grow in your ability to unite the life of the mind, and the life of faith. So why a study center? Why a place? Well, we have a conviction that, as I said at the beginning, the Word became flesh that genuine learning is embodied, interpersonal, and irreducibly theological. And these are the convictions that unite the board and that we hope to pass on to students and to grad students and professors. So before I introduce our speaker for tonight, Brad Littlejohn, let me just make two quick announcements. And I'm going to send these out, hopefully, for you guys just to pass on back. The first announcement is we have two more events in this house this year, and you're going to see them on the front and the back of this flyer. The first is with Chris Tollefson. It's actually in 2 weeks on November 7th on natural law. Chris Tollefson's a professor at USC, a great friend to the Study Center, and really looking forward to his talk. And then Joe Minnick, who's connected with the Davenant House where Brad is going to be here December 6th on a Wednesday evening. This is going to be a talk about divine absence and why does God seem absent even though as Christians we believe he's not. So these are the two upcoming events. Second announcement is that on November 1st, next Wednesday, we're going to open the Study Center from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. So 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And it's just going to be open for people to meet, to study, to get resources, to hang out, to just drop in and get coffee. And we want it to be truly a hub of hospitality and Christian learning. And for more information, probably the best place to go for now is our website that's listed on here about updates. So in light of that, let me introduce Brad Littlejohn. And let me just say, after Brad is finished, we are going to do a couple minutes of Q&A. So just keep that in mind, and he'll just flow right into that when he's done. So Brad Littlejohn is a native South Carolina. He has his PhD from Edinburgh in the theologian Richard Hooker. He has published and lectured extensively in the fields of Reformation history, Christian ethics, and political theology. He is a board member, fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And for 10 years now, he has run the Davenant Institute, which is now located in upstate South Carolina at the Davenant House, which is a ministry that's run alongside of that and that hosts many of their events. If you ever get a chance to go up there, I would highly recommend it. And that is where Brad lives with his wife, Rachel, and 4 children. So please welcome Brad Littlejohn to kick us off and launch our event of the South Carolina Study Center.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's really a great honor and pleasure to be here at this launch event. I remember just a little bit of the prehistory of this study center. Richard came up to our Davenant House study center, which is a different kind of study center, a kind of residential retreat study center, as opposed to most of them that are affiliated with universities. I met him there, I guess, about a year and a half ago, and I think he was already beginning to think about this idea and the purpose of Christian study centers then. I think we talked a little bit about it in broad terms. And then a year ago, I guess it was, I was down here in Columbia, and Richard took me out to coffee and said he really wanted to launch a Christian study center. And what advice did I have for anyone setting out to start a Christian nonprofit? And I was like, well, for starters, don't. If you ever want to sleep 8 hours a night again. But he was like, yeah, of course. But besides that, what other advice, right? So anyway, I tried to give him the best that I had, and whether because of that or in spite of that, it's really come to extraordinary fruition just in the last year, and I am so grateful to see this vision becoming a reality and to be able to be part of that. So, Richard asked me to come here and speak to a lot of university people about what's wrong with the modern universities. This is a little bit of a, I said, is it okay if it's sort of a prophetic denunciation? He's like, yeah, go for it. So, all right. So, blame him, not me. But so the title of my talk is, For All Your Subtlety, You Have Not Wisdom, Christianity's Challenge to the Modern University. It has long been a popular parlor game among intellectuals to try and name the author of the book most responsible for the evils of the modern world. Well, I'd like to add to the conversation by proposing my own nominee, Curious George. Even as a child, I knew there was something wrong with this series of mischievous tales by H.A. and Margaret Ray. As a parent, suddenly tasked with spending the bleary hours before bedtime, regaling my own children with the exploits of this pernicious ape, I discerned that these books were the spawn of Satan. The plot line of pretty much every Curious George story goes something like this. Curious George is left home alone by his adoptive father, the man with the yellow hat. Now, you would think that the man would have learned long ago not to leave George home alone. But we should cut him some slack. Maybe he just can't afford childcare. He gives George clear and explicit instructions not to do something. By page 2, though, George is doing that precise thing. Why? Well, don't blame the poor monkey. He was just curious. Unsurprisingly, this disobedience turns out to be a disaster. All hell breaks loose. Now, in any older book, the next steps of the plot would be clear enough. The man or another authority figure intervenes to help arrest the train of catastrophe that George has unleashed. George is severely reprimanded, is deeply penitent, and learns his lesson. But of course, that's not what ever happens in Curious George. Instead, having unleashed chaos, and with some hapless innocent now in danger, George gets some sudden clever idea to rescue the innocent or salvage the situation. Or else, perhaps by sheer dumb luck, his mistake produces some good unintended consequence that apparently justifies all the damage done. As in Curious George Goes to the Hospital, where after causing complete wreckage at the hospital, turns out to be a small price to pay for making little Betsy laugh again. Now, whatever the case, the story ends with George being celebrated as a hero, perhaps with a gentle, winking reprimand thrown in on the side. Now, who on earth thought this was the kind of storyline that young children needed to hear? Obviously, I exaggerate in blaming Curious George for the evils of modernity, but it does offer a vivid picture of what has gone wrong with our intellectual morality. Curious George represents the 20th century ideal of science. The scientist was forever transgressing boundaries, opening boxes that shouldn't be opened, and pushing that big red button that said, "Do not touch." Why? Well, he was curious. I wonder what will happen if I split just a few little atoms, the curious physicist said. It couldn't do much harm. Sometimes the scientists turned out to unleash all hell on the world. Mercury and lead poisoning, strip mining, eugenics, nukes, and radiation. The list goes on. So why didn't we chuck them out? Well, because no sooner was catastrophe underway than the scientists rushed in with some new invention that promised to mitigate all the damage. Or else sometimes scientific mistakes would turn out to produce blessings to humanity by pure serendipity, as when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin by not cleaning up his lab properly, and then got awarded with a Nobel Prize. Curiosity is the defining virtue of modern science, and thus, by and large, the modern research university, which was built on the ideal of transforming every branch of knowledge by imitating the methods of the hard sciences. But curiosity did not always used to be a virtue. For most of Christian history, curiosity was ranked among the vices. Now, does that mean that all the smears of the Enlightenment were right? That our forefathers preferred ignorance to knowledge, darkness to light, that they labored for centuries in obscurantism? Not at all. On the contrary, Augustine and Anselm and Aquinas were among the most extraordinarily fertile minds the world has ever known, driven ever onward in pursuit of knowledge by their love of the one who contained in himself all truth, and who radiated throughout all creation the beams of his blinding self-revelation. But our forefathers knew that like every creaturely good, even knowledge itself could be disordered by our warped desires. There was a true and a false way to seek knowledge, a healthy and a perverse intellectual appetite. The former they named studiosity, the latter they warned against as curiosity. Knowledge, like other goods, could be sought for the wrong ends, or in the wrong way, or at the wrong time and place. The medieval university then was built upon a particular intellectual ascesis or discipline, a particular ordering of the intellectual appetites formed by the virtue of studiosity. and the good that this virtue sought was wisdom. The modern university, however, is built upon a very different intellectual discipline, formed more often than not by the vice of curiosity, and it seeks after mastery. These two forms of knowledge, these two orderings of intellectual appetite, are vividly contrasted in two of my all-time favorite books, both by great 20th century Catholic intellectuals. One is Paul Griffith's Intellectual Appetite, which is something of a commentary on the corpus of St. Augustine. The other, from which the title of my talk is taken, is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, which is in many ways a literary reflection on the healthy and unhealthy means by which we seek to know the world, contrasting curiosity and studiosity, subtlety and wisdom. The virtues of wisdom and studiosity are displayed throughout in the character of Gandalf, whereas the vice of curiosity appears in many guises, from the relatively innocent but still troublemaking curiosity of Pippin Took to the devouring, soul-destroying curiosity of Gollum. Curiosity does the greatest damage, however, when it perverts the highest and noblest minds. So Tolkien's most powerful portrayal of the disordered search for knowledge appears in the characters of Saruman and Denethor, each of whom represents key foils for Gandalf's wisdom. Now, the Tolkien nerds among you, show of hands. All right, we got a whole fan corner over here. Some of you may have recognized an irony in the titling of my talk. Does anyone know who says the line, "For all your subtlety you have not wisdom"? Okay, good. All right, cool. Well, Denethor says this to Gandalf, actually. Right? Now, Tolkien knew what he was doing, for it is one of the classic symptoms of disordered knowledge that it cannot recognize true wisdom when it is staring it in the face. The curious think that they alone are wise, when in fact they are lost in folly. So in the books, Gandalf is frequently described by both Saruman and Denethor as a fool, even as he continually exposes their own deluded folly. Now, what's particularly interesting about Tolkien's juxtaposition of these characters is that Saruman and Denethor, on the surface, seem to represent contrary dispositions. Saruman represents the innovator, the forward-thinking man of science. The elder days are gone, the middle days are passing, the younger days are beginning. The time of the elves is over, but our time is at hand, the world of men which we must rule. Denethor, however, represents the reactionary, the arch-conservative. I would have things as they were in all the days of my life, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to be the lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me. And yet both are fundamentally modernists. Both have great subtlety, but have left the path of wisdom. In what follows, then, I will explore 5 key contrasts between studiosity and curiosity, distilled from Griffith's masterpiece, show how each plays a key role in the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, and show how each poses a challenge to the modern university, which has been captured by the spirit of Denethor and Saruman. At first glance, the postmodern university, with its neo-Marxist discourse of deconstruction, might seem a far cry from the hubristic temple of knowledge that was the 20th century university. But in fact, as we shall see, it has merely taken the same trajectory, the same path of curiosity, to its logical extreme. So first, known and unknown. Studiosity is animated above all by the love of the known, seeing in every reality a gift of God, a being which images supremely beautiful being. The studious love each reality that they already know and seek a greater intimacy with it, a greater union. This, in turn, draws them onward to know it more deeply and fully, and to know all those things to which it stands in relation. Perhaps I have learned to love the mountains outside my window in the upstate. Drawn by this love, I want to know their names, and then the names of the mountains to which they are connected in the far distance. I want to know their paths and trails, their creeks and waterfalls, and perhaps ultimately the trees and flowers that cover their slopes. Curiosity, though, is quite different, for it is driven ultimately by hatred of the unknown, by frustration that there lies beyond my gaze some terra incognita that my mind has not yet conquered. The curious, writes Augustine, do not love the unknown. It is more accurate to say that they hate the unknown because they want everything to become known and thus nothing to remain unknown. Accordingly, the studious recognize appropriate boundaries to their knowledge, There are some things that they do not need to know or that would not be good for them to know. The curious, however, hasten on heedlessly around the next corner, plumbing the darkness so that they might master it, and never pausing to consider that it might master them. Within the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien presents the lure of curiosity in the form of the Palantiri, the stones of seeing, which promise power by means of knowledge of the hidden and far away. Both Saruman and Denethor initially look into the Palantiri for good purposes, seeking knowledge to defeat the enemy, although Saruman has been disordered by an unhealthy curiosity for some time. Both men are driven by fear and hatred of the unknown, hoping to extend their gaze across Middle-earth and thus predict the future. Both do not realize that there are some things that remain better unknown, some knowledge that we are not ready for. By pushing further than our true capacities, we leave ourselves vulnerable to deception and despair. Alas for Saruman, laments Gandalf. It was his downfall, as I now perceive. Perilous to us all are the devices of an art deeper than we possess ourselves. And later he says of Denethor, in the days of his wisdom, Denethor would not presume to use the stone to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength. But his wisdom failed, and I fear that as the peril of his realm grew, he looked in the stone and was deceived. The knowledge he obtained was doubtless often of service to him, yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. Modernity, and the modern university in particular, has clearly long since followed the paths of Denethor and Saruman. There are no sacred mysteries left to be treated with solemnity and respect. Everything must be questioned and challenged. Every boundary must be transgressed. If something can be known, it should be known. If it can be done, it should be done, whether it be splitting the atom or human cloning. Worst of all, gone is the idea that one must first learn to truly know and love a thing before one earns the right to question and critique it. There is a place for the true master of a discipline to question established canons, to engage in occasional iconoclasm toward great men or great ideas. But the older university understood that one earned this right only by a long discipline of humility, only by submitting oneself to the recognized boundaries of knowledge, the established norms, and the celebrated classics. Today, instead, every student, not just at the university level indeed, but often far younger, is encouraged to cultivate the impiety of impertinent questioning, learning clever new jargon by which to tear down the inheritance of their ancestors, deconstruction, decolonization, intersectionality, and all the rest. The antidote, as Tolkien presents it, is a true and abiding love for the world as it is given to us, a love represented at a grand scale by Gandalf and the elves, and at a more humble and accessible level by the hobbits, who, though occasionally small-minded, model for us the love of the familiar. Frodo and Sam, the most virtuous of the hobbits, are drawn outward in love towards the rest of Middle-earth because they know and love their shire above all. Their pursuit of knowledge begins and ends in contentment and gratitude, not in restlessness. 2, participation or mastery. Second, because studiosity receives the world as a gift, it recognizes that it can only truly know other beings by participation, by sharing in them and sharing them with others. The other must remain other. It cannot be reduced to what my mind would make it. And it certainly cannot belong to me. That would be absurd. That is why the studious no sooner learn something new than they turn and try to communicate it with others. Each learner should become a teacher. The studious feels his own knowledge enlarged rather than diminished by this sharing. Truth is the ultimate non-competitive good. And the studious feel little need to advertise themselves as knowers. If they can transmit knowledge pseudonymously, that is just as well. They are stewards, not owners. The curious, however, yearn for mastery, and knowledge is for them a means to this end. They, quote, come to think, writes Griffiths, that the only way in which they can be related to what they seek to know is by sequestration, enclosing a part of the intellectual commons for their own exclusive use and thus mastering it. The curious, he goes on, inhabit a world of objects which can be sequestered and possessed. The studious inhabit a world of gifts, given things, which can be known by participation, but which because of their very natures can never be possessed. Accordingly, the curious are tormented by jealousy and a sense of competition. The curious do share their knowledge, to be sure, preferably in peer-reviewed journals, but only in order to advertise themselves as knowers. If, God forbid, one of their hearers already knows what they are telling, they feel this as a slap in the face. If the hearer knows more about this subject, they feel angry and humiliated. Best of all, then, is to advertise oneself as a knower with little hints and nods, never quite letting on exactly what it is you know, for fear that the bubble may be pricked, or another may gain the means to surpass you. Anyone who has attended an academic society conference probably knows this game well, and students are encouraged to cultivate a similar demeanor. Again, the intellectual deformations of wokeism serve this impulse well. As Matthew Crawford observed a few years ago, whatever else it is, wokeness is a competitive status game played in the institutions that serve as gatekeepers of the meritocracy. By its continual innovation of new acronyms and shibboleths of politically correct speech, wokeism helps to separate the rubes from those who are in the know. The purpose of all these terms is not to educate or illuminate, even their purveyors scarce know what they mean, but rather to advertise knowledge as a symbol of status and a tool of wielding power. Modern students, trained to think of the intellectual enterprise as a competitive zero-sum game in which one can only rise up by tearing others down, inhabit a world of paranoia and insecurity, constantly looking over their shoulders to see if someone else is going to tear them down. In The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien highlights that great evil comes not so much from Saruman's and Denethor's decisions to look into the Palantiri, but from their insistence on keeping it to themselves, hiding their knowledge in secrecy. "Fool," says Gandalf of Saruman, "to keep it secret for his own profit. No word did he ever speak of it to any of the council." Both Saruman and Denethor, interestingly, are stewards, or meant to be. Each has been entrusted with a crucial fortress and repository of knowledge. Orthanc, in Saruman's case, Minas Tirith in Denethor's. Each, however, has fallen into habits of mastery and domination, rather than stewardship, treating his domain and his servants as merely resources to be exploited. For Saruman, of course, this desire for mastery descends to a much deeper level of corruption, as he becomes little better than the Dark Lord himself. Denethor, at least, is still on the right side, but so selfish, paranoid, and protective of his realm does he become that he can no longer see any good but the good of Gondor, Gondor as ruled by him. Quote, "The Lord of Gondor is not to be made the tool of other men's purposes, however worthy, and to him there is no purpose higher in the world as it now stands than the good of Gondor. And the rule of Gondor, my lord, is mine and no other man's, unless the king should come again." A purely privatized good, as Tolkien shows, is no good at all. At the crucial juncture, Denethor manages to do almost as much damage to the cause of the free peoples as Saruman. Unsurprisingly, both Denethor and Saruman show themselves to be gnawed by doubt and paranoia. Seeing the world in starkly competitive terms, they cannot imagine that Gandalf is motivated by anything other than the desire to one-up them and seize their little domains. In fact, however, Gandalf's perspective is far broader, representing the wisdom of one who sees all of Middle-earth as a gift whose care he is entrusted with. In response to Denethor's proud assertion of the good of Gondor, Gandalf offers this rejoinder. "The rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other, great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, these are my care. And for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. If anything passes through this night, they can still grow fair or bear fruit, or flower again in days to come. For I also am a steward. Did you not know?" 3. The pursuit of novelty. The curious are driven above all by the pursuit of novelty. For what better way to roll back the frontiers of the unknown, and what better way to take possession of some piece of knowledge for oneself, than to discover something no one has ever known before? This all-consuming thirst for novelty is at the heart of our disordered relationship to digital technology, pulled ever onward by the infinite scroll to lay hold of one new tidbit of knowledge after another. But it is also at the heart of the disordered intellectual vision of modernity, which rewards only new discoveries and treats knowledge from the past as dust to be trampled underfoot. The studious, however, see themselves as participants in a great conversation, as called to gratefully receive each gift of knowledge from the past, and pass it on faithfully to a new generation. "Curiosity," writes Griffiths, "is concerned with novelty. Curious people want to know what they do not yet know, ideally what no one yet knows. Studious people seek knowledge with the awareness that novelty is not what counts and is indeed finally impossible, because anything that can be known by any one of us is already known to God and has been given to us as unmerited gift. In seeing the world as gift, the studious encounter it with wonder that never fully goes away. Indeed, if anything, it grows the further they journey through the cosmos. The studious see reality as one interconnected whole, that must be known as a whole in order to be properly known at all. But since such holistic knowledge of reality will always elude human ability, the appetite of the studious remains forever unsated, and their eyes grow forever wider in wonder. The very thought of this is intolerable to the curious, who, remember, are driven on by fear and hatred of the unknown. Thus, in order to render reality knowable, they must break it down to size through ever more fine-grained analysis, fragmenting the world into cold, clear shards that will not defy their gaze, pieces that may be laid out on a grid, sorted and classified. By thus breaking down anything known and established into smaller and smaller fragments, they ensure a fresh supply of novelty. Whereas the studious rest satisfied with the sight of a beautiful tree, the curious chop it down and grind it up in order to make fresh discoveries. Where the studious admire a completed work of art for the meaning it conveys, the curious deconstruct it into contradictory impulses and purposes, so that meaning is endlessly deferred. This dangerous obsession with novelty, with despising the given in favor of the chosen, the old in favor of the new, the whole in favor of the part, is portrayed by Tolkien in The Corruption of Saruman. In a jarring anticipation of the obsessions of modern identity politics, Tolkien portrays Saruman as abandoning whiteness for the rainbow. Gandalf says, "For I am Saruman the Wise." He's chronicling his conversation. Saruman says to him, "For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors. I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors. And if he moved, they shimmered and changed, so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better," I said. "White," he sneered, "it serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed, the white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken." "In which case it is no longer white," said I, "and he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." In this remarkable passage, Tolkien seems to have many of his innovating Oxford colleagues squarely in his crosshairs. Saruman has left behind the wholeness and purity of his white robes as something boring and outmoded, a mere starting point for the process of analysis and innovation. He prefers to deconstruct it into its constituent parts, like the experimental scientist or the trailblazing literary critic. Around the same time, Lewis was writing in his Abolition of Man, "A price is exacted for our analytical knowledge and manipulative power, even if we have ceased to count it. We do not look at trees, either as dryads or as beautiful objects, while we cut them into beams. The first man who did so may have felt the price keenly, and the bleeding trees in Virgil and Spenser may be far-off echoes of that primeval sense of impiety. It is not the greatest of modern scientists who feel most sure that the object, stripped of its qualitative properties and reduced to mere quantity, is wholly real. Little scientists and little unscientific followers of science may think so. The great minds know very well that the object so treated is an artificial abstraction, that something of its reality has been lost. Whether it be a beam of light, the atom, the idea of authority, or the human embryo, modernity seems convinced that one must break a thing to find out what it is. This may be the path of curiosity, but it is not the path of wisdom. As Lewis wrote in the final sentence of the Abolition of Man, "To see through all things is the same as not to see." Tolkien, Lewis, and Griffiths are all seeking to rebuke the disordered intellectual ecosystem of the modern university. The publish or perish imperative of academic promotion, together with the presumption that the only things worth publishing are new contributions to knowledge, creates a culture from first-year grad school on up obsessed with novelty. Of course, the commitment to publishing new original research serves a worthy purpose in the hard sciences, but its application in other fields can make a mockery of the intellectual enterprise. Consider the discipline of Christian theology, concerned as it is to faithfully transmit the faith once delivered to the saints. In this field, the novelty imperative is a recipe for the continual generation of heresies. More and more as I have gone on in my academic career, I've become convinced that the crying need of the moment is for great scholars willing and able to faithfully restate, in fresh and accessible language, the rich truths of the Christian past, rather than trying to find something new to say. The modern university, and even more so the postmodern university, is methodologically committed to despising all that is old and inherited. Either it is simply boring and outmoded, or else, as we are more likely to be told now, it is a structure of oppression that must be leveled to make way for true liberation. Every great work of literature, every great man of history, every powerful religious insight must be analyzed, deconstructed, seen through. The white page must give way to an elusive rainbow, shimmering and changing so that the eye is bewildered. 4. Stewardship versus technique. The studious, says Griffiths, encounter the world in the dative case, that is, as people addressed, called, and gifted, and only secondarily in the nominative case, as subjects looking out over a world displayed for our delectation and consumption. Accordingly, while they do not just passively receive the world, they understand that human creative activity within and upon the world can only ever be sub-creative. Again, we are stewards, not masters, called to heal the world of its wounds and shepherd it towards its full potential. The curious knower, however, sees himself as, quote, the active one, the one who initiates, undertakes, performs, and controls. He is above all interested in learning new techniques, which is to say new ways of mastering the world and bending it to his purposes. He indulges in delusions of grandeur about the things he might achieve, the new frontiers he might cross by means of such techniques. But although these aspirations are often justified on behalf of posterity, the curious are really not that much interested in posterity. Since the purpose of knowledge is control, they fully intend to reap the fruits of it here and now. Knowledge must justify itself in the technological benefits it bestows in the present. The studious, however, see themselves as part of a story that extends into the unknowable past and the unguessable future. They seek to act faithfully without necessarily knowing what hidden fruit these actions may yield in time to come. Tolkien, of course, had much to say on the subject of subcreation. The idea that human beings as God's image bearers are called to exercise dominion by imitation of his creative work, but an imitation that is always dependent and derivative. The sub-creator must work with the grain of the material he has been given. He must paint with the palette supplied to him. No one can come up with a new primary color, as Lewis observes in The Abolition of Man. The sub-creator is a steward then, a title that, as we have already seen, is claimed by Denethor in Lord of the Rings, but that properly belongs only to Gandalf. The great anti-steward of the story is Saruman, who transforms the beautiful fertile valley of Isengard into a wasteland, sending his orcs to hack and destroy every living thing in sight. Why? Not initially, at least, out of an appetite for mere wanton destruction, although he ends up there, but out of a desire for mastery and innovation. Curiosity's thirst for novelty leads to an obsession with technique, with using the powers of the human mind and will to remake the world in our image, or any image we want to, for that matter. Saruman, says Treebeard, has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things except as far as they serve him for the moment. Like the modern-day subduers of nature, who must end, as Lewis shows, by turning their technique upon human nature itself through the science of genetics, Saruman's thirst for technical mastery soon leads him to foul and unnatural eugenic projects, creating a race of half men, half orcs. By comparison, Denethor's corruption is not nearly so evident, and yet it partakes of the same intellectual disease. Denethor is presented as a leader of great technical competence, who has shrewdly overseen great works of fortification and military planning. But for all this subtlety, he has not wisdom. Why? Because he has fallen into the narrow utilitarianism that bedevils the curious. This is why he finds himself drawn by the lure of the ring, the ultimate work of technique that gives power and mastery over nature. Obsessed with the security of Gondor, which he sees as the only hope and bulwark for the rest of Middle-earth, he yearns to at least have the ring available, even if he has no intent to use it, he says. Gandalf rebukes him. "You think, as is your wont, my lord, of Gondor only, yet there are other men and other lives and other times still to be." The technology that may seem to offer momentary salvation may turn out to be a disaster for the world we are called to care for. The path of wisdom involves taking a perspective that is at once much wider and much more modest, taking the long view without thinking that one can control the course of history. Quote, "It is not our part to master all the tides of the world," admonishes Gandalf, "but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule." I need hardly pause to observe how the modern world, and especially the modern university, has followed the examples of Denethor and Saruman. The world is seen as so much raw material to be remolded in the service of human will. Any domains of knowledge that seem impractical, that do not serve the tyranny of the urgent, are to be thrown aside as obsolete. Witness the steady replacement of liberal arts departments with data science and biotech programs. Some, like Denethor, seek this technical mastery for conservative ends. Others, like Saruman, for more nakedly anti-human ends. But both have traded wisdom for subtlety and thus ultimately for folly. 5. Finitude or despair. Finally, as just noted, the path of wisdom, of studiosity, is one of humility, embracing our finitude. It is not our part to master all the tides of this world. Or as Gandalf elsewhere says to Frodo, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. The studious know that the world exceeds their grasp, and they are okay with this. They feel how very small they are every time they go on another journey of discovery into a great book or sit through a lecture by a great scholar. They know that it is not their task to truly master the world, but only to steward it on behalf of their royal master. They do not try and foresee every threat or guard against every eventuality. They are content with the small task allotted to them. The curious, however, cannot stop seeking and hungering, cannot rest content without mastery. They indulge in the hubris of thinking that they can see through every mystery, they can tackle any problem, they can extend their gaze into every corner of the cosmos and predict even the future. When, however, the world still inevitably slips through their fingers and their schemes fail, they have nowhere to go but despair and even suicide. This nihilistic end of curiosity is on vivid display in the Lord of the Rings. From the lowly Gollum to the lofty Saruman, all of those possessed by the delusions of grandeur that curiosity breeds end up choosing self-destruction over humility. Given every chance to repent and be free, Gollum chooses rather to perish with the ring rather than abandon the dreams it holds out. Summoned over and over by Gandalf and then by Frodo to recognize the failure of all his fantasies, Saruman instead chooses an ever more pathetic mode of existence, dying at last at the hand of his own servant. The curious, for all their boastful aspirations to be masters of the universe, turn out to have a death wish. Like Satan, they would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. If they cannot be sole masters of their domain, they would rather destroy themselves and the world along with them. If doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated, declares Denethor, before throwing himself and his son on a funeral pyre. We too live in a nihilistic age, in a civilization possessed of a death wish. The 20th century marked the high watermark of human aspiration, of the belief that not only could our knowledge penetrate into the furthest recesses of the cosmos and the nucleus of the atom, but that our power could match this knowledge, that we could be as gods. When we used this godlike power and our utopian dreams of socially engineering a better world to wipe out whole cities and whole people groups, we found ourselves not merely chastened, but despairing. Like Denethor, the knowledge we obtained was doubtless often of service to us, yet the vision of the great might of Mordor, the power of evil, that has been shown to us, has fed the despair of our hearts until it overthrew our minds. 20th century man stopped passing on the civilizational inheritance that he had received. Increasingly, we stopped marrying, we stopped having children. To accelerate this civilizational suicide, we have now begun asking doctors to castrate our children. As Oliver O'Donovan wrote prophetically 4 decades ago at the advent of gender reassignment surgery, to hate one's own flesh is the limit of self-contradiction to which our freedom tends. It is the point at which our assertion of ourselves against nature becomes an attack upon ourselves. And so it is equally true to say both that no man ever hates his own flesh, and that this self-hatred is the term to which our proud self-assertion is inevitably drawn. just as the worshippers of Baal on Mount Carmel, according to the prophetic history, were impelled to cut themselves with knives. Today, utopianism and nihilism have come full circle, meeting one another at the technological frontier. Our only salvation, we are told, lies in self-renunciation, replacing ourselves with artificial intelligence and merging our bodies with the machine. Increasingly, we are governed by a Silicon Valley technocracy that not only, like Saruman, has a mind of metal and wheels, but which dreams of replacing our minds with metal and wheels as well. Here at the University of South Carolina, you have not yet come, perhaps, quite all the way to this precipice. But it lies not far ahead. In an age hell-bent on progress, the thought of retracing one's steps is anathema. And yet any other path leads to destruction. It is the task of Christianity at this moment in history to recall us from the self-assured delusions of subtlety before they end in madness, to remind us that not all knowledge leads to wisdom. Our only rescue lies in repentance, and yet nothing is harder for arrogant moderns and angry postmoderns, trained to despise all that lies behind or anything that reminds us of our dependence. We have, says Griffiths, quote, subjugated ourselves to the fantasy of independence and self-determination, pretending that we are captains of our souls and masters of our fates. And this is the most damaging of fantasies, for becoming habituated to it guarantees that you will not get the help freely to be had by asking for it, but which can only be had in that way. The fantasy of self-sufficiency, the determination to please yourself, coupled with the illusion that you can, is the unforgivable sin against the Holy Spirit. For it, and it alone, guarantees that you will not beg, will not ask the forgiveness you need. How then can the South Carolina Study Center contribute to returning us to the path of wisdom? Its role is one of faithful witness. As a parallel institution, planting anew the seeds of ancient wisdom alongside the withering and dying stalks of the modern university, the SCSC offers a picture of what the university was meant to be: a community of shared learning that receives the gifts of God and reflects them back into the world. Its very presence stands as a prophetic rebuke and a call to repentance to a university that, like Pharaoh, has hardened its heart. Time will tell whether God will soften its heart. But in the meantime, the South Carolina Study Center can build a model of what the life of the mind should look like, offering a haven to students and professors alike, eager to rediscover the neglected virtue of studiosity, the forgotten way of wisdom. Thank you.